Welcome. Glad you all are here. I'd love to finish this story this week. Are y'all okay with that?
I don't know. We've enjoyed it.
Three weeks of one parable is pretty intense. Can I invite somebody to read it nice and loud for us from the easy to read version? And I have extras up there on the that I'll gladly hand out if you want one. Any volunteers? I will hand you one. Me too. Thanks. All right.
Start.
Whenever you're ready.
All right. Luke 15:11-32. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf, and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found.
Thank you. Okay. Rachel, you said you've enjoyed these 2 previous classes. Let me open it up to the whole class. Anything that's jumping out at you today, or anything that you've picked up on in the last couple of classes that you want to make a comment about, prompt discussion about, ask a question about?
Well, I used to always think that the younger brother had taken an unfair portion until we began studying. I heard people say more than once that he took what was his own share. He was willing, he could do what he wanted to with it. It was foolish, but it didn't have anything to do with the older brother, what he did.
Okay.
This is off subject, but I think one of my favorite parts of these stories is that there's music and dancing and partying.
That's not off subject.
I love it. I love it that our God loves that.
It actually is not off subject. I would really like, I appreciate you pointing it out, because we do have a tendency post-Victorian era to downplay the amount of celebration that's in the scriptures and how important it is. And if you just go back through and think about, especially the idea that the prophets offer a major theme that the restoration is going to be a banquet, like God's restoration of all things gone wrong is a celebratory banquet. And so eating, dancing, singing, maybe even wine is included in those images. And that's what, I mean, that's here on purpose to say how the Father feels about the move towards the accomplishment of his goal. Really quiet. All right. I want to think about these words, home and exile. Talk to me about home and exile in this story and in the overall story of Israel.
I think as Americans, home is an easy concept for us, but exile not as much.
Okay.
We haven't, I mean, unless it's like you feel left out. It's just, that's a harder word for me to understand or to feel than home.
And what you're hinting at is maybe some people in America do feel exiled.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Home and exile in this story or in our lives. Talk to me about it.
Well, exile to me conveys the idea of a judgment upon an individual to drive them out of away from home and family. But in this case, it's self-exile.
Isn't that amazing?
I can't help but remember way back in the day, 1959, there was a bunch of us that wanted to see our hometown in the rearview mirror. And so there's not many left, the class of 59. But the exile, the seeking of something that seems like it's better, and the viewpoint of the person plays a big part in understanding that one word.
So I love what you just did there, Jim. Unless somebody's got another pressing comment, I'd like to extend what Jim just said. So think about, okay, lots of people go out to find their fame and fortune. You know, they graduate from high school. My mom is on the TV. Nope, she's not. She dropped off. Good. Now I can say this. You know, I stood in her driveway when I left for college and I said, I'll see you around Thanksgiving. And my thought was, I am so out of here. I'm going to go, conquer the world. But the truth of the matter is, I still look forward to cookies from home. I still make phone calls. I still carried I carried my bedding from home and put it on my bed at college. I was still home even when I was at college. Do you get what I'm saying? I was not in exile. I was still home. I still shared life with them. I still wanted to know if mom or dad got sick, if I needed to come home for something. All of that still mattered, so that it was not exile. And if you think about it, even in a forced situation, young man or woman joins the military and they travel across the world, whether they're drafted or they enlist. They want to hold on to home even while they are gone. That is not exile. So when this story says he spent everything he had in reckless living, it's literally saying every reminder of home was gone. All connections to home was gone. So much so that as a bankrupt person, he turned to a foreigner for his support instead of going home. He eventually comes to himself. But coming to himself means coming home, coming back to his place in the home, in the household. And he says, I don't think I deserve to come back as son, but son is not the only relationship at home. I could have the option of the relationship of servant. I'll go home and be part of the household and the blessings of the household. And I'll do it even as a servant. Man, what if Jesus is talking about the posture of Israel? What if Jesus is actually saying, Israel, you went into exile in Babylon, into Assyria as a choice. You chose, you self-exiled. And when I brought you home, did you come home? What was your attitude as you came home? And then, what was my attitude as I brought you home? And now this story starts to take on a really deep meaning for Jesus' initial hearers. Jim.
Can't help but wonder if there were anybody in the crowd that first heard this parable that thought, that's the same thing that Hosea's wife did. She left him.
Mm.
And was it more than once? I can't remember.
I think so.
Anyway, there's that self-exile.
Yeah. Is this just intellectual bubblegum for you? I'm curious whether this carries any significance for us.
Ron, I think Americans do have a hard time with exile because our forefathers came here not because I'll say my forefathers came here not because they were forced to, because they were looking for something better. And so it was okay to break the ties with Scotland when the English came in and divested everyone of their property, right? To make the big farms, the big sheep farms, and nobody had anything. Pretty easy choice for a 19-year-old man to go, I'm going somewhere where it's better, right? So he comes to America, and unlike, say, the Jews in their exile, where the Psalms are all we long for home, it was our home. There's this huge attachment to the land and the homeland. Americans, in a large part, are here because they chose to come here seeking something better, and because home was not better, it was worse, right? So I think we have trouble with that. And in relation to this story, I don't know, as far as the self-exile paradigm, I think it's very much in here, but it's really, to me, I don't know if Jesus really meant this as part of the parable, but we talk about why does God, give us free will, but that's certainly in the story here, right? The Father didn't say, you're not getting anything, dude.
Right.
Take off if you want to, but you're not getting a dime. I mean, he could have said that, right? As far as I understand the culture, he could have said, I'm not giving you anything. You want to leave, dude. And so I think that to me, that's an interesting part of the story. Why didn't the Father say, yeah, you can't have that. You got to stay here and earn your inheritance. You're not just going to take off with it. He didn't say that. He said, man, that's what you want to do. That's what you're going to do.
I think we can get a good idea of exile by watching the movie Fiddler on the Roof.
Mm-hmm.
That is really a gripping scene down at the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's exile. They're forced out. They're moving from everything that's been familiar for generations. So
I like what you just said about the first hearers hearing this, about Israel's exile. I hadn't thought of that before. But I bet it was powerful for them. If they got it.
Right. Now, go back to, yes, absolutely, Rachel, I totally affirm that. Go back to what Jim said last week about, this is all in response to the question, why is Jesus eating with tax collectors and sinners? Why is he hanging out with others, not us, with the thems instead of the us's, right? And, or usins, yeah, in Oklahoma we say usins. Why is Jesus doing that? So Jesus seems to be responding with, God is trying to bring back the thems to being us. I mean, God views those others as children who are dead to him and who are away from him, lost from him. And this is the response. It is the Father's goal is to have a whole family in shalom, in wholeness and health and well-being and flourishing. And because that's the Father's goal, the younger son being gone is an obstruction to that goal. And the older son refusing to come into the celebration that Rachel wants to be part of, that is also an obstruction to the Father's goal. And so we see what Jesus is saying is, I understand your aversion to the sinner. And I know that you have a strong desire to purify your lives to be acceptable to God. And we've got a holiness ethic that is firmly entrenched into our society. But you've forgotten the mercy ethic. And you've forgotten the restoration ethic and the idea of coming home from exile and reestablishing the family. And the holiness ethic, the drive to be acceptable so that God can be in our presence. That drive to do that is only for the attaining of the goal of fellowship with God. It is not our goal to attain holiness to raise our personal status. So Jesus is challenging this thinking that the sinners are unacceptable. I mean, he puts the younger son not just in exile, but below pigs. He is below pigs, feeding them and unable to even eat their food. He's not allowed to eat their food. That's as low as you can get. Okay, so I go with this words, Father, Son, and what we have here now is the narrator never stops thinking of the younger son as a son. Now, he doesn't, he uses pronouns, so that throws it. But you see, when he comes home on the front page that has the title of the class at the top, the bottom paragraph, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and embraced him, and the son said to him. So even before the son confesses, even before the father embraces him, or even as the father embraces him, he's already a son in the narrator's view. So this is Jesus pushing this idea that even people who are alienated from God by their behavior or their self-exile are still considered children of God by God. And that's a significant thing. But they're not, the younger son is not considered a child of God by the older son. Look at the language. This is where we get into the your. So on the back side, the starting at verse 28. He was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father. So the narrator still thinks of him as son and father, but the son, look at how he thinks of himself, the older son. Look, these many years I have served you and never disobeyed your command, and yet you never gave me a goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, he's just unbrothered himself. This is not my brother. And because he is your son, I am not your son. He's unsunned himself. When this son of yours came home, who has devoured your property, that's a true statement. With prostitutes, we don't know if that's a true statement. How does he know? The narrator didn't tell us that. So what's happened here? What's happened here is not only has he unbrothered his brother, but now he has so othered him, put him so far in the them camp, that it's easy for him to tack on extra derogatory views of him. He's able to add baggage to support the unbrothering. You killed the fattened calf for him. Now, I think this is really important. You know, the ERV says, these many years I've served you. The actual language here is, I've been your servant. I've been your slave. It's doulos, the Greek word doulos. I've been your slave. So the brother has viewed himself as the older brother has viewed himself as unsunned for some time. I've only stuck around here as your slave, which is the job the younger son wants. The younger son wants to be a servant. And the father does not want the younger son to be a servant, nor the older son to be a servant. And so now we have this call of Jesus to say to us, I want you to think of yourselves as God's children, as his heirs, as his family, not as his servants. And this is a challenging concept as Jesus shares this with the people. It is very exciting to all of those people who do not feel good enough to participate in the spiritual life of Israel as Jesus hears them. It's very good news. Very good news. But to those who feel they are the religious elite trying to raise the tide and lift all the boats by their perfect obedience to the religious system, they view themselves as slaves to God, not as children of God.
So what does this parable say to us, post-crucifixion Christians, about our relationship with those people out there on the highway that won't come into church on Sunday morning?
The great unwashed.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good term.
That is exactly the question. What's the answer? I'm just making observations in here.
Well, I think it's really easy to be the son that stayed home and obeyed, and then to be really upset that here's somebody that doesn't deserve this, and they come in and you're just all over them and willing to forgive and give them everything. And look, I'm the one that stayed here and was faithful and did all this work. I mean, it's real easy to see why the older brother was upset and angry. That's just, yeah, that's just human nature.
But it is human nature that is based on his perceived relationship in the household. If he had not unsunned himself, if he was still pursuing the father's goal, he would have longed for the return of the younger son, the same way the father does. And it would not be a problem. See? And this is what really challenges us here is our individualism. Because for us, even with our own siblings and our own families in America, we don't think in terms of what is the family, what is the clan, what's the ancestral goal for our people. We don't think in those terms. We think in individual terms. How can I go out? Now, sure, I'll thank my mom when I score a winning touchdown, but the winning touchdown is mine. It's not my mom's. Does that make sense? It's so really important that we begin to understand this is a familial, it's a communal, it's a household goal here. And we want to align our will with the Father's will and begin to see people as the Father sees them and relate to them that way.
Related to that, I'm thinking of, I find the issue comes into is when the older son is saying, Dad, that's not right. He's basically challenging his dad's judgment. And I think we do that, like I'm relating to what you're saying, the older son's challenging it. Same thing with the Jews going, wait, well, why you let these Gentiles in? Or what I'm going through, my sons are down visiting in-laws and like, it's so boring. And I'm like, there's a reason we're doing, or y'all are doing this, and I don't know if you're living the life. But the place it comes down to is like, they don't get it. And I keep telling my sons, it's like, you don't know what you don't know right now. One day, maybe it'll make sense to you. And the older son, I think, is in that same situation. It's like, what are you doing? This guy's, he's going to double cross you again, Dad. And the father's got a different perspective going, wait, you don't know what you don't know. And I think we do the same thing with our relationship with God and the other unwashed masses. Like, oh, I'm not sure if you this person.
Oh, that's from the Garden of Eden.
Absolutely.
Challenging God's authority in God's who God is. Starting with that there.
Okay, I have just a little bit of time left, and I do want to finish this class, and there is a point to make at the end of the class. So we're going to finish the story with this. The idea is exclusion and embrace. And I'm talking about how not to kill our neighbor. And the number one way we don't kill our neighbor is by stopping our excluding of them and beginning to embrace them. Okay. But our immediate response to this is our gut level, instinctual, feels like it's inappropriate to say in Sunday school class response to this is, but aren't there some people who need to be excluded? Aren't there reasons to exclude people? And the answer to that is yes. When God sends Israel into exile, he is excluding them. When in Jeremiah, God screams at Judah and says, I'm filing for a divorce. I'm done with you. That is exclusion. The existence of exclusion in our world is both necessary and unavoidable. It will happen. Problems will always arise out of exclusion. Problems cause exclusion, and problems grow in exclusion. And so, it takes me a long time to process and digest Miroslav Volf because he's so much smarter than I am. But here is a Croatian theologian who has lived through the horrors of the Eastern European. Is that accurate, Brad? That's Eastern European. The Eastern European struggles for independence post the fall of the Soviet Union. Again, the fall of the Soviet Union was touted as a great victory. And yet it resulted in a tremendous amount of trouble because of the amount of exclusion that existed within the household of the Soviet Union. The groups of people who did not get along and cooperate with each other, but remained at relative peace only by the violent force of the Soviet Union. So when that force and that control is gone, and Brad, feel free to correct me, that's gone, then those who are in exclusion with each other, but our neighbors now they have a choice to make. I would point out one more example. In South Africa, when apartheid falls, now we have an elimination of a militaristic enforcement of peace. That falls as apartheid falls, and now groups within that force must figure out how to live with each other. Guess what doesn't work? Exclusion. You move to your boundaries, I'll move to my boundaries, and everything will be fine. Well, the first problem is, okay, but where are the boundaries? Which boundaries are yours and which are mine? Which ports do I get access? Which trade routes do I get access to? And no. So the way apartheid overcame all of that was by people like Bishop Desmond Tutu standing up and calling for embrace. And the only way we can have embrace is if there's admission of guilt and there is a conscious choice to forgive. And it has to be spoken. And then we have to act in accordance with that. And that's what happens. The younger son admits his guilt. I've sinned against heaven and against you, Father. I am no longer worthy to be called your slave, your son. Make me a slave. But the father says, no, I will forgive and embrace and reinstate you as son. And that is how the father moves towards the goal in the parable. This is hard. If you have an abusive spouse, the only appropriate response to that is exclusion. If true change cannot take place, exclusion must remain. I'm sorry. This parable is not trying to say all exclusion is fixed by a forgiveness. That's not what the parable says. The parable presents a son who is truly changed. His mind changed, his thinking. He's come to himself. He's come home in his head. And therefore, the father is able to embrace him and bring him in. Good. How are you? And that's how this works. And so there are boundaries, and I'm not trying to pretend with all of this that it's easy or uncomplicated, or there aren't hard things to deal with. There's lots of hard things, and it's a long, hard, drawn out process. The question is, can we all get on board with the Father's goal? That's the question. And how do we work towards that goal? That's what we're looking for. And so I'm inspired when I see stories like someone I know whose parents divorced when she was young, and young adult, and yet they worked hard to maintain a friendship. And even though her father remarried, her mother did not, she watched that strained relationship and lived in the tension of that, but with all of their family holding on to the goal that we are still family. And then her mother is diagnosed with cancer and goes through a multi-month process of dying. And her father, her biological father, leaves his new wife, not divorcing her, but physically, like with her blessing, goes and sits by the side of his first wife and watches her and cares for her as she's dying. Again, it's not in destruction of the new relationship, but it is in that holding on, we are still family mentality. That is an embrace that overcomes exclusion that broke and caused pain and problems. This is how this plays out in real life to me. And I have multiple stories like that of people I've watched. That doesn't mean every story turns out that way, but that is an illustration of how we wrestle with these ideas. Does that make sense? All right, we're out of time. McBrooms and Rothrocks, I'm sorry I never called on you. I should have. We love you all. Have a great day.